they're rallying the Trump base, pandering to the Trump base, and then the Capitol Hill riots happen, and then like in the face of these new events that were totally unpredictable, that definitely weren't kind of let to happen.
Egged on.
Yeah, like that weren't kind of basically orchestrated by us. Like, yeah. So in light of those things, there's no way that we can object. And like 5 or 6 of them made speeches in that to that effect. Like, I was going to stand tall against or like voting for it, but in light of the insurrection on Capitol Hill and the blah blah blah, I can no longer do that. So I think they were wanting, like, there's obviously a good chance it was just them capitalizing on a politically
they're like, oh, we see an opportunity to get rid of Trump anyway, so let's just take it. Never waste a good crisis.
That's kind of what I wonder. Like, I was thinking along those veins, not like with the initial riot, but with the chance for actually impeaching Trump, because then they don't have to worry about Trump running in 2024, right?
You can just
like, you don't have to worry about him potentially splitting the party because he can't run for president again.
Because if he's actually been impeached.
Yeah, maybe Ryan's right. I don't know that detail. If the Senate votes for impeachment, then yeah, Ryan might be right. You can't. I don't know the rules.
Yeah, that's if he's actually impeached, not like the half-ass impeachment of just one of the houses, but if the House
if the Senate confirms it or whatever.
Yeah, and I think like this, I see them seizing that opportunity to get Trump out of there for good. Like,
yeah, just put a final nail in it and just say, okay, we're doing clean break. It's back to business as the
because it only needs like a certain like number. Like, how many senators do they need for?
I think they need 60 or 67. I think that might be 2/3.
Yeah, so like they just need like the establishment boys to just be like, enough is enough.
2/3, yeah. So I think they need 67.
I think there's actually a good chance that it might happen.
There's 50 Dems, although I think the New Georgian senators would be able to vote, I think. So it'd be 50 Dems. So they need 17.
I don't know when they're confirmed in. One of the things that I found interesting was that apparently Alex Jones claims that he was funding parts of the protest, like through an anonymous donor.
Alex Jones, you never know.
Why is that like a big deal though? Like, what's his claim with funding it?
Well, it's just hilarious because then it ties like people like Rogan to it. It's just gonna piss off the left base even more. Anyways, we're live, so this could be 18 podcasts in a row about this crap, but probably get on to the real topic, the big topic of the day. So we're gonna actually. What's that?
I was gonna say it's more of the same, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just previous instances of stupidity.
Exactly. So, with that being said, what we're covering today is essentially major hypocrisies and sheer dumbassery of people when it comes to COVID. So politicians doing hypocritical things, people doing, various government branches saying things and then going back on them, people just being ridiculous on top of this all. So,
well, if I was just to like outline it, I think COVID is like a great topic to illustrate a whole bunch of other problems. Just because like there's nothing inherent about it that should be like partisan or polarized or caught up in craziness. Like it was a new thing. It wasn't, there isn't much of a history to it. So it's not like you can, trace back, with a lot of other heated topics and heated issues. You can go look back through the development of those topics, and they've been back and forth for, decades, fought back and forth, blah, blah, blah. There's a history there. There's like something that came out of the blue and then just turned into a absolute cesspool from the start. And so that's why I think it's like so interesting to take a look at just all the all the shenanigans that it highlights, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the best way to cover it, in my opinion, is maybe go a little bit in chronological order from the start of what it would be like late February or something like that, maybe even a bit earlier.
Oh man, we gotta go earlier than that.
Well, actually, yeah, we do, because we got the Who. We got some classic Who stuff. That's
people like to. Well, that's one of the weirdest things. People like to let the World Health Organization slide just because Trump was mean to them. It's like Trump had every justification to be mean to them. It's like he might not handle it well, but that's not a badge of merit on their side that Trump was mean to them.
Yeah,
people treat it like it is.
People should have been a lot harsher. I think we can move through it in chronological order, starting with, well, literally at the very beginning. So, Price, you want to kick it off, since I think the beginning stuff is where you, because you were the first of us that was on top of this. So,
yeah, the first really good one is that Taiwan had investigators in West Taiwan, otherwise known as mainland China, early on in the COVID outbreak, because they heard there was a pneumonia-like virus going around, and they didn't want any second coming of SARS. And so that was about early December, and based on their investigation, they warned the WHO that there was a endemic pneumonia-like virus in China that the WHO didn't really listen to. Then China warned the WHO, I believe, on like the 29th. So that was good because Taiwan somehow managed to be ahead of the entire world on knowing about COVID just because they weren't asleep at the wheel. But at the same time, the World Health Organization is kind of supposed to be the first line of awareness for the rest of the world. And they just totally dropped the ball.
Yeah. I think
after that... sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, after that, I think like the funniest thing that occurred is through January, the Chinese just kept lying about everything. And the WHO just took them at their word. And when the virus finally went to another continent and became endemic, I think it was when it got to Italy. It was when it might have been to Iran first. But basically, until the swine flu, the definition of a pandemic was an illness that's endemic in two countries and continents. So just if Russia or Turkey get it, doesn't count, even though it's two continents. So it had to be endemic in two continents and two countries. And then that was about it. That was a pandemic. That's what the word means. It's around the world. Endemic is it's in your country locally. And then after the swine flu, they got so much blowback for labeling a pandemic when it was a pandemic that they actually just dropped the criteria for deciding what a pandemic was. And they had no objective criteria to label something a pandemic. So they just kept delaying labeling COVID a pandemic until about a month after the point at which it reached all of the thresholds that they had set in whatever year that was, 2009, before they got rid of them. But it's barely even a real pandemic. Don't even worry about it.
I also do think some of the early stupidity was the WHO not like having basically any recommendation against shutting down flights, international flights. Like
another classic.
It was like nothing, and I think it was also some American politicians jumped in on that one with Pelosi saying it was essentially, if I remember correctly, her basically saying it's xenophobic to cancel flights from China, and saying that go out and celebrate a good time in Chinatown for the New Year, Chinese New Year.
That was
I know for sure
the New York
public health officer.
Yeah, she's like, I think Pelosi definitely said something along those lines too, but I know that was the New York public health officer saying, no, like it's totally fine. Why would you think so? Like, to think otherwise is to be bigoted.
Yeah, I think Pelosi was talking about the international travel as being not a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a knee-jerk reaction in America to basically say any efforts taken to contain the spread were xenophobic. And there was tons of media coverage through January and February saying that not only was COVID just the flu, like you would see for months afterwards, that COVID actually wasn't even just the flu. And that, don't you know, the flu kills like 40,000 people a year? And what's COVID killed? Like a couple hundred people in Wuhan, maybe? Like, it's not even a big deal, guys.
Oh, another classic from the early era, which I guess also continues now, is just calling it COVID-19 and like in the media and coronavirus in the media. So funny to me that every other virus is labeled by where it's from, except for COVID, pretty much. And
First in January, it was Wuhan flu everywhere. It was
Yeah.
the Wuhan flu because they didn't even people didn't know what a coronavirus was, so they weren't going to call it the Wuhan coronavirus. People wouldn't get it. So it's short and sweet, Wuhan flu. And it's like all of a sudden that wasn't politically correct.
Well, and I guarantee you that was like concerted pressure by China across the world to get it moved away from Wuhan flu to coronavirus. And the hilarious thing now is, what is everyone talking about now? The Kent, the UK variant, and the South African variant. They don't call them by their proper names. The 2012 variant, which is the Kent UK variant. They call it the UK variant, which it probably didn't even originate in UK. It's just identified there because they have like 20x the sequencing technology that every other country does. So it's just so funny that now it's all of a sudden okay.
Oh, it's also the South African variant.
Pardon me?
The South African variant. That's what everybody calls the South African.
Yeah, exactly. They call it the South. There's no problem with calling variants by their locational origin or potential locational origin. But no, we can't call it Wuhan flu because that's clearly racist, clearly evil. It's so dumb. Like that. Another Chinese propaganda winning out and fucking us.
Kent's getting what we like to call the Spanish treatment, where Spain was the first place to acknowledge that they had the Spanish flu, and then from then on, people are like, that must have come from Spain. It was like, it clearly did not come from Spain, but it will forever be known as the Spanish flu.
As far as I know, all the indications is that the Spanish flu is actually American origin, right?
That's what I read.
I don't know. I don't think they're 100% certain, but I think they're fairly certain it's American origin.
Yeah, I think that's the best guess. But I think what they are certain of is it wasn't Spanish, just based on the timelines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that kind of brought us up to like when it actually started spreading through the rest of the world into
like late February into March, March.
And like in that span, there was in like March, April, the most significant, I think, fuck up and hypocrisy was the CDC and Fauci saying that masks aren't effective in March.
And let's not forget the WHO and our Canadian Theresa Tam, very much on the same boat.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, it was the Americans saying it wasn't effective, and pretty much everyone followed suit, right, across the Western world, at least, saying like, "Oh, masks don't work." And then I actually looked up on April 3rd is when the CDC flip-flopped and said, "Oh, masks are effective. You should be wearing them."
Yeah.
And so it was like a month, about 6 weeks of them saying, no, they actually might be harmful.
More harm than good.
Yeah, more harm than good. And then, so 6 weeks of that being broadcast as the message, and then they flip-flop in April. And the funny thing, too, is Fauci kind of, not fully, but if you look at some of his quotes, kind of admits that, masks are effective. We just needed to keep them for the healthcare workers. So,
yeah, he also stated that he doesn't regret doing it. And I think that was rather interesting. It's like, you obviously got to save your reputation there. You don't want to lose face, but I think it
leads into the other classic with China of buying all of the world's excess masks while downplaying the pandemic when it was in Wuhan. and so that no one was actually starting to stockpile these emergency supplies in January, and they were actually like stockpiles were at an all-time low because China was buying anything they could get their hands on.
I remember coming across videos of people walking into a warehouse, and there's a few Chinese guys in there, and they just have pallet after pallet of like Lysol and all sorts of like masks and stuff, and these guys say like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "Get out!" Like what? Like, why are you in here? But the guys, they're like a couple. I think it's somewhere in the States, but they're just like flabbergasted. Like, what's going on here? Like, we've noticed that you've been buying up all of this like PPE everywhere, and they just won't answer them. And it's just like, I wonder what was happening there. The funniest thing is, like, nobody. I've mentioned this to a couple of people, like a few people in my life, and they've all been shocked. They're like, really? Like, China did this? Like, what? Like, this was happening? It's like, yeah. Why do you think there was like such a massive undersupply?
Well, they were generous enough to donate a bunch of defective garbage after the fact.
Yeah, and I'm sure Canada was thinking about paying for it.
I haven't been able to confirm, like, I haven't seen any national news stories on it, but like I've heard anecdotes from healthcare workers in Canada getting allergic reactions to masks from China. I'm like, I don't even know what you put in your mask that gives people allergic reactions. It's just crazy.
It's just not even masks.
There was a couple of other funny, this is like for CDC, flip-flops that I thought were just interesting to note. One was they released material. This was like super late into the game, but they finally said, COVID-19 spreads by aerosols, and this was in the summer, I believe, which was like long after pretty much anyone with a functioning fucking frontal lobe had figured out that COVID-19 spreads by aerosols. But then 3 days later, they retracted that statement, saying, "Oh no, that was an incorrect release on our part." Like, I don't know how you incorrectly release a whole page about how it spreads by aerosols, but I guess they accidentally did it. Whoops.
That was an internal memo for the people who needed to know the truth. That wasn't meant to go to the public.
And then later on, they also, or another point, they said that testing, there was no need to test asymptomatic people. No point in it. And then they later changed to saying you should. So a couple more hilarious flip-flops, and a lot of that.
Oh man. Doing the research on that, it was just like, because I was reading like Theresa Tam, she's like, we didn't know what the best data was, so we're just operating on the available science, and it was just so clearly like, you guys, I figured out, like, the three of us had figured out in like April that, or by March even for some of this stuff, that this was true, because we were just reading the papers coming out on the various some of it
you don't even need to I bought masks at the end of February, beginning of March, because it's like, no shit, this probably works.
Well, like, you just use logic, exactly. Right? It's just
it's like, why are we fucking masks don't work, so then why are healthcare workers donning full PPE?
Yeah, and exactly. It's just like, use your brain for 3 seconds.
And, clearly healthcare workers still did get coronavirus, but it's not like 100% came down ill with it, which you would expect if masks weren't effective. Like, it just clearly works. Like, there's no question that is an effective strategy. So just like, you don't even need to know the science to figure that one out. And then aerosols was just also pretty much an obvious one based on how fast it was spreading. Like, couldn't be anything but.
No, well, not to mention that while they were denying it spread by aerosols, they're also saying masks did nothing, which masks are almost completely effective at pure droplet transmission, which there's plenty of evidence on from influenza outbreaks in the past.
True. Yeah, exactly.
We don't have the flu this year.
Well, they knew that this was a respiratory. This is the thing that I always just find absolutely bonkers, is they know that this was a respiratory upper issue, and therefore it's obvious that you're going to use the same tactics that work on other diseases that are at least somewhat similar. Like, yes, okay, maybe it's not going to work exactly perfectly, but it's just so obvious that no matter what, those basic things like masks and a few other things, they're going to work. And it's just so, I just found it absurd that they would say, no, masks don't work. Like, they just can't work. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
It worked absolutely perfectly. How about that herd immunity strategy that the Netherlands and the UK were going to run with? Now, that was a good time.
And Sweden. That was Sweden, based on their genius fucking health director, was like, oh yeah, it's gonna basically hit herd immunity in the major metropolitans by summer. We're good to go. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
Like, Britain had some forecast along the same lines, like they'd get herd immunity by like late summer, early fall. And then as soon as they actually started getting cases, they're like, wait a second, this is way too dangerous to let 70 to 80% of our population purposely get infected in a few months. Like, what were you thinking?
Another thing, fun one. This wasn't so much in the media, although it kind of did get into the media. That was just idiotic. Was people that were like claiming, oh, like the IFR is gonna like play out to be at most like 0.1, at most, absolute upper limit of the IFR is like 0.1, 0.2, absolute most it could ever be is around that. And it's like, and then I had seen people claiming that in, even kind of science forums up until like May. And this was at a point when New York had like 0.15% of its entire population already die.
Yeah, I was just like
and then my question was like, okay, so you expect that? So your assertion is that New York is at 100% prevalence? Like, what the fuck is going? And that was there was actually a CDC slide that's where a lot of people were getting their number from, was internal documentation from the CDC released back in May that had upper limit IFR 0.15%.
Speaking of good internal documentation, how about it just disappearing in August, I think? By August?
Yeah, the models that were
the most advanced models that started at 100,000 deaths with, zero happening after like June or July or August or something, and then it got revised down to at most 60,000 deaths in the US.
Yeah, that was crazy because that one, it's like something was just so fucked up in their like conflict of interest going on there with someone modeling those things for them to think that was possible.
Well, and we do have to give a little bit of, I think there should be some credence put towards like the CDC, and a lot of those modeling stuff was just, I think they were like at gunpoint from the Trump administration, because Trump actually, when they revised that down from 100 to 60,000, Trump actually came out and took credit for that. Like, as if like the model changing was like a huge win for like President Trump. Like, oh my God, look what I did. It's like, you didn't do anything. Like,
yeah, you are just literally
some dumb model.
Yeah, like you just demanded a new model. Yeah.
Some dumpster fire model getting even more dumpster fire. What a win! What a absolute feat of fucking political genius, buddy. So that was like into the summer. I don't know if you guys can. There was actually probably the most like disgusting amount of hypocrisy that I saw in the whole pandemic was around that time too. I have an article from May 18th from the Guardian, where it's U.S. lockdown protests may spread virus widely, cell phone data suggests. This is May 18th, and the quote from the article being, "The behavior we're seeing at protests carries a high risk of infection." This was like a group, Democratic Party affiliated group. The leader of the group had previously run for office as a Democrat, of 300 doctors. And this was due to this was the lockdown protests. So these doctors were super concerned that, transmission was going to run out of control because of all these lockdown protests. So on May 18th, cut to a CNN article, June 5th. So like 2 weeks later, and this is them positively highlighting a 1,200 healthcare professional letter asking that the George Floyd protests not be shut down. And a couple of just juicy quotes from that article. from the letter of these healthcare professionals. One is opposition to racism is vital to the public health, including the epidemic response. Whatever the fuck that means. And they go on to say that that the protests shouldn't be suppressed in the name of public health. And they go on to, this is a quote from them again from the letter: "We do not condemn these gatherings as risky for COVID-19 transmission. We support them as vital to national public health." So on May 18th, high risk of infection from protests, and doctors across the country are worried that the COVID boom is going to be facilitated. By June 5th, protests are vital to the national public health. Like, what the fuck is wrong with people? Like, it's actually retarded. Like, I don't know how you can be a doctor, how you can get through school and be this hypocritical and a dumpster fire of a human. Just
that I think to me was the thing that bothered me the most, where people, like, I saw this all the time. There's tons and tons of articles saying contact tracing proves that there was no spread from the protests. It's like,
classic.
It's like, okay, one, like then like, of course, the contact tracing is just like some random Guardian journalist who has absolutely no experience writing science before. It's like shitty interpretation of it, and then you actually just go look up the trends, and it's very clear that at least some spread occurred, because you had huge spikes in cases and deaths after the protests, like a few weeks after, which is exactly what people were worried about. And then you even get people like the mayor of LA and whatnot saying, like, yeah, this actually was a problem, and it spread coronavirus pretty rapidly throughout our city. It's like, no shit. Like, no shit.
Vital to national public health. Well, without those protests, do you know where we'd be right now in terms of deaths? And how can an epidemic without anti-racism protests? Well, it's not possible.
The thing that pissed me off, there was two things, and like to cycle back to like the mask issue, there was two things that I think that really damaged public trust, and that was the main problem in all this that bothered me. Was you really, like, it's institutional trust is at like an all-time low coming into all of this, and you really needed to be careful if you were any of these big institutions to make sure that you get the people behind you to trust you, so people follow the rules. And when they said, oh, masks don't work, they don't work, and then they switched over, you even have McLean publishing multiple articles saying, Tam, what are you talking about? Like, this about face is terrible. And this is McLean's, like, an incredibly left-leaning, liberal-supporting magazine, and they were very upset about it. They said, this is not a good look, and you're going to burn up a lot of the public trust in this move, which I think they did. I think that's one of the reasons we're dealing with these big anti-mask problems, because, like, in the city that I live, there's anti-mask protests like consistently, and it's a super left-leaning city. The other thing was like the lockdown protests. I think when people saw Justin Trudeau wandering around with all of these protesters who were screaming about shit that doesn't even, like, it's not even relevant to Canada at all, after he had been saying for months on television, like, stay home, save lives, and then he's out there, kneeling and shaking hands. He got caught shaking hands, and when he had been saying, like, you can't have any contact with people. I thought those two things...
himself from kissing babies, at least.
Yeah, at least he did that. But, like, those two things I thought were the biggest, just ridiculous hypocrisies, where I think that burned up so much public trust that, like, no wonder there's always going to be problems with that, but I think that was enough to really just, especially in Canada, but in the States it's a bit different. But in Canada, like, Trudeau's actions there, and then the actions of the, like, talking about masks, I think that just torched not all of the public trust, but enough that you have a pretty big chunk of people who just like I even know, like, relatively well educated people who they don't listen to COVID rules. They're like, why? Why would I listen? Like, you lied to me. And these are like normally pretty reasonable people. And they're like, it's all bullshit. So I'm not going to do anything. Like, you can't make me.
Well, and to be fair, like, the flip flopping went both ways too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like you had conservative, say, leaning outlets that were, saying that the lockdown protest, positively covering lockdown protests that went to, decrying the George Floyd protests as, a public health emergency.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, I think the actual evidence that was borne out was that no protests were that, like, yes, they did probably have some rise, but like outdoor activity even at night was basically determined to be quite low risk, so they didn't really lead. And you can see that by like the summer numbers in the US overall, which was when like, a lot of the protests were at the absolute peak, were not that bad. And now you have like way less protests, and the US is getting pounded right now, so it wasn't like a determining factor for sure. But I do think it's just like the coverage around it in every way was just so partisan and polarized and horrible. It's like I don't know, it was absolutely absurd, like the flop on that.
We can't let this pass without my personal favorite example, where the contact tracing in New York did not ask people whether or not they had been to any protests.
Yeah.
And that was reported on as, I believe the quote was, New York contact tracing finds no evidence of protests spreading COVID-19.
That's exactly what I spotted.
Ask the question.
Yeah.
It's
just like, don't test, don't have COVID.
Don't test, don't tell, baby.
It's the same strategy, right? Like the classic Trump move, just, if we don't test, then there's no problem. And then I think, so that gets us pretty much to the end of summer, unless any of you guys remember.
Oh, speaking of the don't test, don't tell, the US, the CDC wanted a generalized COVID test that could test for, or coronavirus test that could test for SARS, MERS, and SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID. So they wanted to test for two viruses that basically don't exist in the public anymore for no discernible reason. And they refused to buy like a German test that would test for just COVID because they wanted this as their stipulation. And then when that product turned out not to work, that they'd consigned millions of doses of, they pretty much had to emergency roll out a bunch of tests that were thrown together by labs of scientists that were pretty much keeping up with the data and developing tests for their own like mental sanity. Like they were like I'm just going to work on this because I'm so worried about this. And then the US government's like, we kind of need you to deploy those tests. Like, we fucked up.
And again, I do think that that's a good point to jump in, where I think like a lot of that comes down to like the Trump administration just, basically torpedoing the CDC at every step, right? Like, say basically the Trump administration and just lack of probably proper personnel appointments.
It's like a culture of incompetence.
And not staffed properly and everything. And it was so you can just see when a institution is stripped of its effectiveness, it just like bad things happen. So I think that's true of a lot of the CDC flip-flopping that we've already touched on, is like the Trump administration was basically holding a gun to their head, where the experts wanted to say one thing, but the politics made them, I think that's true of the aerosols, right? Like the only reason to flip-flop around about aerosols is to basically stop panic, because aerosols are scary, right?
And another big one is for healthcare workers. If something can be aerosolized, you have to take like much stricter precautions than if it's just droplet. And they didn't have the PPE to give the healthcare workers to deal with an aerosolized risk. So if they labeled it aerosolized, they would, like, there were tons of reports on the PPE shortages in America, and that was without it being labeled as aerosolized.
Yeah, fair enough. Like, so it was a lack of the experts even being able to talk, because they were hamstrung by the Trump administration.
Yeah, I think despite
every step of the way.
I think the big story there with Trump is not even his corruption, but just like his level of gross incompetence and his inability to make sure that, you know, the people around him are competent, because I think he's got too fragile of an ego. And I really think that's going to be the story
Yeah, and
that
his
gets written.
inability to just like not undermine his competent people around him. Like, he constantly undermining Fauci. Like, Fauci, you know, there's criticisms that, I mean, I have some criticisms of him as well later, but like the worst thing you can say is he's miles better than pretty much anyone else in terms of being able to talk about these things intelligently. And then Trump, you know, contradict him literally in the same press conference. Like, it's just embarrassing, honestly.
It's
the amount
incredible.
of like word salad, where if you tried really hard, you could kind of like picture the backroom talk before the conference that Trump was told these things, and then he somehow, in like the intervening hour or whatever between being told the information and trying to convey it, mangled it all together into like an incoherent jumble, best exemplified by the injecting
Bleach. and what was his excuse? That it was like satire, essentially?
Yeah, that was.
He was just joking.
I don't even think he made that excuse first. I think the right-wing news media covered it as a joke, and he ran with it.
And then he also said to basically UV or the inside of your bodies. And again, you're right. Like, it was obviously some fragmentary piece of thing he remembered from actual stuff, because for the UV thing, there was a company that does essentially internal UV.
Yeah.
So it's not like big or anything, but it does do it. And so he probably had heard some report of this or something from somewhere, or something about UV and the virus, and then he's just he's not smart, and just confabulated it into some like total mess. And then people are starting to drink bleach. Like, it's just unreal. So I do think it is good to highlight just like that level of incompetence and just
sheer
and it's fine for a president or someone in that position not to be an expert and not to be able to have it schematized in their mind such that they can relate it to the media. That's why the experts are at the conference with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, your job there is to say, this guy knows shit. I listened to this guy. And here's his explanation. And then that's all you need to do.
Please have the podium. That's literally what good leaders do, right? They take in all the information from the people around them, the best experts they can find. They synthesize it into a decision, and then they make the decision, and then they move on to the next one. You don't need to be the guy who explains it all and is doing all the research. It's so funny to watch him do that. It would be so funny if he wasn't such a moron and literally let COVID run way more rampant than it could have. That's not to say that, though I don't. The one thing I do find absolutely incredibly frustrating is that not everybody, but a lot of people blame Trump and saying like, well, you know, COVID wouldn't even really be a big deal in the States if we had Biden or we had Hillary Clinton. And it's just like, no, the States is like, Canada has Trudeau, who is clearly like more competent than Trump, and it's still a mess. Like, we're not doing nearly as badly, but it's still tough, right? Like, it's not like we're doing incredible like another, like New Zealand or something. That's the other thing that really annoyed me.
Well, I do think, I think that's been like a generalized problem, just people overprescribing like pandemic results to political leadership, and it just doesn't seem to pan out. Like, you can say, because the U.S. does present like a opportunity to look at that in real time with very different leaderships at the state level, which the states have so much power that you'd think that the state level leadership would dictate a lot of the course of the problem. And the worst two states by far are New York and New Jersey. Both Democrat-ran states, very Democrat. California is getting obliterated, also Democrat. Texas,
deeply Democrat too. It's like
Texas getting devastated, like obviously very Republican. And then you have like, some states that are doing quite well. Shockingly, Hawaii is doing very well. Oh, that's weird. They shut down all flights in that Hawaii. Like, oh man, it must be the leadership. The Hawaiian leadership is just spectacular. They're so good. Like, how did they do it? How did they manage to pull off such a feat of leadership? Same with Alaska. Like, Alaska's leadership is just tremendous leadership, top-notch leadership in Alaska. Clearly, just head and shoulders above any other state-level administration in terms of their competence, and that's why they're doing well. Probably doesn't have anything to do with travel and population density. Couldn't imagine that playing a factor into a pandemic. So yeah, I think that's also been just people cherry picking bad outcomes and saying, oh, that's clearly the result of the other side of the political spectrum screwing up leadership wise.
Yeah.
Speaking of canceling flights like Hawaii did, a classic that I only recently learned about is that despite the travel ban between the United States and Canada, which was a huge deal, like limiting travel to essential only was just an absolutely, like, probably the first time ever. It was a big deal when we had to bring passports to go into America from Canada.
Yeah, and that's sad days. That really was sad days.
Yeah, so like this is the type of border we've got. And then apparently America, though, has never at any point during the pandemic closed the air border with Canada so that flights from Canada to America could go through the entire time. And most people just never clued in. And there seems to be no logical explanation for why the air flights weren't banned. And they just still aren't banned. And questions were asked in the one article I read, and it just didn't have any answers.
The funniest thing about that is now there's a bunch of Canadians flying to Florida to get their vaccine. There's a bunch of senior Canadian citizens flying to Florida to get vaccinated.
Nah, that is not the place I'd be going to get the vaccine.
So, like, it's
you
like,
get COVID on the plane.
Bizarro world. Like, it's actually bizarro world. Like, you have... Yeah, I don't know. It's just too
stay home, wait till it gets rolled out in Canada, and
it just seems way too risky to take a plane if you're at risk. Like, what?
Exactly.
It seems like planes are kind of... I've seen conflicting evidence on planes about how high the risk of spread is. I guess, yeah, it's probably not great. I wouldn't do it. I mean, I guess Florida... They probably want to go to Florida anyway because there's a ton of snowbirds, right? And they're probably just like, fuck it. We'll go down to Florida for the nice weather and get vaccinated and then chill. Like,
yeah, true.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah. If we want to close out the summer, I have one last one that happened right at the end of summer.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
And that was Nancy Pelosi going and getting her hair done at a San Francisco hair salon. Even though they were supposed to be, the only way that they were allowed to operate was if they were operating outside, which this one wasn't. It was operating indoors, and she didn't wear a mask. And she had been bitching at Trump constantly about his mask use, and like, because Trump wasn't wearing masks. And then she got caught doing that. And one of the funniest things is there was another politician, another heavy hitter Democrat, Lori Lightfoot. She's the mayor of Chicago. Same thing. All salons were supposed to be completely shut down, and she still went and got it done, her hair done. And I've noticed that there seems to be
the mayors are the worst. There was the Austin mayor, Austin, Texas mayor. He flew to Mexico and actually tweeted, I think he tweeted or made a video saying like, "Stay home if you can," from an Airbnb in Mexico.
Yeah, there was
no joke. He's in his fucking travel flat in Mexico saying "Stay home if you can, essential travel only." Denver, the Denver mayor.
It was the Denver mayor. Yeah,
flew home for Thanksgiving. Also, he had also been messaging about how important it was to stay home. Andrew Cuomo, everyone's pick for the next presidential candidate because of how good his conferences were, had invited his daughters and mother to his 89-year-old mother to Thanksgiving dinner. And then everyone's like, that's a huge violation of the law of rules. And he's like, oh, I guess I'll cancel. California Governor Gavin Newsom was having unmasked indoor dinner with lobbyists that he just refuses to really go into, saying it was a judgment error.
I wonder which ones those were. That's big tech guys. There's so many of these.
There's a million. Californian Senator Dianne Feinstein went maskless inside multiple times, despite demanding people wear masks inside. She wanted it to be made mandatory. Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser traveled to the Biden victory with staffers breaking restrictions. Like, it's just, I don't even know. Like,
there's so many of them.
Canada has also had a huge share.
Yeah, we had a great Christmas.
Yeah, what is it at in Alberta? There's like half a dozen.
Alberta is, I believe, 8 that actually left the country for Christmas or during December, and it's one of them was as petty as to go to Hawaii for Christmas because her and her family had been going to Hawaii for Christmas for 17 years.
Well, that's clearly essential travel. No problem with that. Move on.
There's a couple of them that I felt were like they were going, if they are actually true, which I kind of feel that they probably aren't lying this bald-facedly, but there was a couple that said they were going to take care of like sick and dying relatives in the States, and it's like that one I do feel a little bit like there's a little bit of
there's still no excuse because, in my opinion, because there's been like tons of people have been unable to be with their dying loved ones across the world, like because the hospitals are closed and you can't go in and see your COVID positive dying relative. Like that's like just a reality for every person that's not a politician. And it's like, wow, you not only did you not only did you go and see them, which is probably not good, but you also traveled for it. Like, it's a double fuck up. Like, it's just it's such a double standard. Like that was like one of the liberal politicians in Canada went to Greece because they said they had a sick grandmother there.
Yeah,
like, well,
that one I felt was like you had a quote unquote sick grandmother. It's like your grandmother had a little bit of a cold and you wanted to go to Greece.
Even if she was sick, like that is not an excuse. That's not essential travel.
When you're an adult and you have a grandparent, they're always sick. That's how old they are. Like, what's another good one? Oh, just the fact that in Alberta, which is the most conservative province in Canada, these are all conservative ministers, and all of them obviously got in line and supported the party line about lockdowns and banning this travel. It's like, if you're going to do this as like a what's the term? Basically, like people who take responsibility for themselves or whatever. Like, you should have resigned your position in protest of these measures before going off on your trip. Like, that would have been truly the honorable thing to do. And
asking for honor in a politician is just, it's like,
well, at least vote against the COVID measures.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like it's not that like I'm expecting honor out of them, but like they would claim to have been like honorable, like upstanding, morally virtuous people who would never go against the principles as they go against what appear to be the principles. It's like, what?
Yeah. So that, I'm sure it's like every other. I know there was the one international one, the not Canadian U.S. was basically the designer architect of the London lockdown was caught driving to his dad's house in contravention of his own lockdown measures that he designed, and he got fired.
The thing is, like, if he had literally wrote in an exception for himself, then it's like, okay, you're a complete dickhead, but you didn't even bother to do that. Like, you could have just wrote that in.
I actually designed the lockdown measures.
Exactly. It's like you can stick that in there
immediately. Like, it's too fucking rich. Like, it's just unbelievable. Like, actually, like, bizarro world.
You just can't hold patricians to the standards of the plebs. You know, there are different
Well,
rules for different classes.
and I did see that interpretation of basically, you know, I think there is that interpretation where a lot of these things are probably not a big deal. Like, you know, say flying to Hawaii, like Hawaii has very low COVID rates, and also Hawaii requires you to have a negative test before flying there, so you know all your other passengers have been tested recently and are negative. Like the risk from going to Hawaii is limited, but you know that's a personal judgment call that you have to make as an adult. I think that flies in the face of basically the public messaging that all these politicians have been having, which is basically you're too much of a baby and an idiot to make your own risk decisions, your own risk, you know, judgments. We have to do it for you, except for I can do it for myself. Like, I'm an adult and I get to make these probably reasonable risk assessments, like having your haircut indoors or whatever. Like, but you can't, because you're an idiot and you will fuck it up. And you know, I are smart one.
To be honest, it's like they're not entirely wrong for a decent chunk of the population who are going to ignore the rules and take risks that are too rougher for others. But I think that you cannot have that contradictory messaging, because people are just gonna take your lockdown rules, your whatever rules it is, and they're just gonna throw them in the garbage, and they're not gonna follow any of them now.
I think that's like the thrust I was trying to get at with, like, they should have resigned on principle. Like, if they believe people are capable, like if they believe they're capable of making a risk assessment, they shouldn't just make a blanket rule that doesn't allow for individuals to make risk assessments in their actions. It's just like so bizarre.
Well, that's why hypocrisy, right? Like, because I guess, you know, yeah, if you're a politician, you just have to make some personal sacrifices that you're expected to, right? Like, you're a public facing individual.
You're a civil servant. Like, you're supposed to be there to do your job properly of leading by example, and if you can't do that, you are less than useless. You're harmful.
Exactly. So, like, I can understand their internal logic of, like, them saying, well, I can make this, you know, informed risk choice. I think it's low risk. That's fine for me. Like, and they're not wrong, probably, right? Like, they're probably right about that it's probably not a bad deal. And there was probably something to be said for the general public in general, in a broader sense, may not be able to cope with so much, I guess, judgment. But as a politician, you just have to, if you're going to vote for kind of blanket measures, you have to follow them. Like, you lose, it's just you lose the ability to pretend you're better than the public because you're a politician and you have to lead by example. Like, otherwise you have absolutely no ground to stand on in terms of, like, asking people to follow the rules you came up with. It's just laughable that you would even try.
Yeah, that's the thing, that that type of hypocrisy just burned up so much of the public's trust, and now I think it's a way bigger deal, because I think there's a sizable chunk of the population that always would have made poor risk assessment choices, and then there's but I think there's a way bigger chunk now that do it. Like, maybe it's not 75% of the population, but even if it was, like, you know, there's going to be 15% of the population that was going to do stuff that was not in their best interest and really was going to make COVID worse. Now you have like 25%, and especially when you have exponential growth, like that's enough to really cause problems. And, you know, I just cannot believe that you would be so dumb in a situation like the one like Pelosi or Trudeau. It's like, you're the face of these your party, essentially, and of your country, and the fact that you would make such a choice it's just beyond me. It's just, I cannot believe somebody would be that smooth-brained. But like, all
these politicians just need handlers. Like, you need someone just basically reviewing your life and your plans and saying, you know, you can't do that, it's stupid.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you're a monkey, don't do that. If you do this, this is what's going to happen.
It's always shocking me that they don't yeah, they always kind of so many of these politicians just kind of seem surprised that there's such like criticism and backlash against their stupidity, and it's just like I don't know, like are you incapable of like viewing yourself from the public perspective? Like, do you have like no ability to like no theory of mind? Like, it's insane to me. It's like how could you possibly think it would play positively for you that you were going like to dinner with lobbyists when restaurants were closed? Like, what? Like it defies logic.
In the modern world, it's really easy to keep things like that secret and on the down low.
I honestly think that is I honestly think that that's their logic. It's like, man, I don't think anybody's gonna notice. It's fine. It's like, you're always in the public eye, especially the bigger name. It's like,
cojones on you to fucking tweet from Mexico.
Yeah, that was so good. That's so good.
Like, just the balls in your fucking vacation suite. Just that
is amazing.
What a beauty. What a fucking the absolute fucking balls on the man. Oh man, it's so good. You guys have anything that kind of catches us up to Christmas? I mean, there's been some shit around the vaccine too.
The vaccine and the masks, just like the level of idiocy coming out of the anti-mask, like the anti-masking movement is just, it's so spectacular. Like, the thing that gets me is just, oh yeah, it cuts off your oxygen flow, so it's dangerous for your brain if you wear a mask. It's like, oh my god,
no. Oxygen use in your brain is...
It's like, how do you come to that conclusion? I've driven
all those
by
doctors
protests.
And nurses, just brain damage. You hate to see it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I've driven by protests with those like seeing those signs, and it's incredible. It's like, how? And these are not like a couple, like, two dozen people. It's there's a few hundred there, and it's just like, this is amazing.
But still, that represents a infinitesimal, tiny fraction of the population. But
I know that, but it's still like, it's just incredible to see something like that. It's like, that is like a failure of intelligence to the point that I don't even understand it. I just don't. I can't.
Well,
I can't be that.
The funny one is like people complaining like the only legitimate complaint about masks that I've ever seen is like there has been like it is possible to get basically sore throat from a mask if you never change it out or don't wash it. So
yeah.
So if someone's like complaining like, oh yeah, like masks give you bacterial infections, it's like, yeah, if you're actually disgusting slob, you're right. Like, yes, that's true. If you have left your mask unwashed or unchanged out for like weeks, then yes, you might have given yourself a sore throat. Congratulations, you're gross.
I honestly wouldn't even put it past, like, if you're in that sort of tier of functionality, I wouldn't put it past that they actually just ate a load of sugar, didn't brush their teeth, and went to bed and got the sore throat and blamed it on the mask.
True, but yeah,
it's the same sort of bacterial infection as when you have sugar overnight in your throat. It's like the bacteria in your mouth are multiplying more than they're supposed to because of your mask that's unclean and full of the same bacteria.
Yeah, so if you have poor personal hygiene, yes, you can get sick. That's true, and they've stumbled onto that. It's really revolutionary that poor hygiene can lead to sickness. So, the vaccine one is also, I don't know. There hasn't been as much stupidity, I guess, or as, I don't know.
Hasn't been enough time yet, though. Like,
wait till it gets more
masses, and then we'll see some good stuff.
Yeah,
I do think like the only thing that I've kind of seen with that was like the Pfizer CEO saying, "Oh, I'm going to wait my turn. I'm not going to jump the line." Like,
you're the CEO. Just get
your
it.
vote of confidence in your own product is so much more important than you quote unquote jumping the line, buddy. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Like it's just like, I don't know. It's
the one stupid thing with the vaccine is the Oxford vaccine, where they fucked up the testing. And then everyone just ran with those fucked up test numbers and test subject groups that they should not have run with and started claiming it was 90% effective when in reality it's about 70%.
But all the other ones were 90% effective, so you might as well just, it's a good story, then all of them are 90% effective at least, right? Like
Triple 90s.
Exactly, like, yeah, so there's a bonus round. I don't know if you guys have time for a bonus round, but I was reading I'd kind of known some of this stuff, and then I was reading an article from the Intelligencer, or the New York Mag, I think it's called the Intelligencer, the specific one, on the potential lab leak hypothesis. And
I remember that.
The lab leak hypothesis in itself is also just a hilarious thing where, it was completely off the table. Like, you had to be a conspiracy theorist, tinfoil hat, wingnut to consider that a lab leak was possible.
Literally,
after, March.
a Capitol storming neo-Nazi.
Well, it's like you had to be a crazy person to consider it after March, even though we have no idea what intermediary could be for the zoonotic. Like, there was no plausible zoonotic explanation put forward that proved zoonotic. Like, there was one very weak paper written supporting the zoonotic transmission, and basically all that paper could really say for sure is we can't rule out zoonotic. It's yeah, we can, but I guess that's not.
But you can't you can't rule out lab leak either. That's
you can't
you can't do both ways.
You guys saying that zoonotic is possible is not the same as saying that lab leak is impossible. So, but anyway, in that article, I did find there's some interesting threads where Fauci has repeatedly denied that COVID-19 could have come from a lab. He's basically one of the people driving it's the lab leak is a conspiracy. But he has an interesting relationship to all this because he was in charge in his role with the National Institute of Health. He was in charge of a lot of funding for obviously health research in the U.S. He started with the AIDS vaccine, but after 9/11, he shifted over to basically vaccines for Cold War biological agents like anthrax. That was his obsession, and his budget also massively ballooned due to 9/11. And the only biological attack that's happened in the U.S. was a government employee at one of the labs stole anthrax and sent it to people and killed them to basically create demand for anthrax vaccine research. So that's the only thing that they've ever had happen that's related to this vaccine research. And his goal was to create 24-hour vaccine development timeframes. So basically, he called it bug to drug in 24 hours. So as soon as they got the biological agent, they could have a vaccine for it in 24 hours. And he was worried about basically biowarfare, releasing some, basement biologist releasing some sort of pandemic-causing agent. And then in 2014, there was a number of high-profile lab fuck-ups, and they paused the. They were, well, I guess to explain further, they were going on to fund gain-of-function research, which was basically them brute forcing viral changes in viruses to make them more effective to humans, or gain function essentially, make them much more efficacious in humans for the virus, from the viral perspective. So making them able to bind into human tissue, etc. And they do all sorts of experiments to do this. And high-profile fuck-ups led them to pause this in 2014. But under Trump, Fauci and the Trump administration started pushing this super hard. When Trump came in, the gain-of-function, the quote from the article, gain-of-function research came roaring back under Trump and Fauci. And NIH funds made their way through various channels to the Wuhan lab. So there's actually a fairly likely scenario that Fauci is almost directly responsible for COVID-19.
Well, that's a more involved explanation. I'd heard a similar theory earlier in a different article, although I believe that the funding for the Wuhan lab from the NIAID, I think that's the specific parties in charge of, like National Institute of AIDS and Infectious Diseases, or something like that. Anyway, because Obama was the one who banned the gain-of-function research in the United States, and almost immediately upon that being banned, they just funneled millions of dollars into the Wuhan laboratory because it was one of the only laboratories in the world that could do gain-of-function research because it had the proper level of safety, and it was in a country that still allowed gain-of-function research. And that was all directed by Fauci.
Yeah, so...
Tinfoil hats.
and one of the big guys who was
on.
in charge of the initial paper rebuking the idea of the lab release hypothesis and got a bunch of signatories on it about how it couldn't have come from the lab, had worked with the Wuhan laboratory in developing gain-of-function.
Yeah, I think he was one of the ones that
was discovered pretty early on, too.
Funneling the money.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a little outside the scope of just bitching about that, but I do think it's maybe... It probably will never get an answer one way or another definitively. My money, if I had to bet my life on it, I would say it's a lab leak, almost 100%. It is a beyond believable coincidence that there was an extremely unlikely zoonotic event that happened in Wuhan from an animal that doesn't even live in Wuhan, with another random animal that they can't identify, just a few miles away from the only level 4 lab in China that also happens to have the most closely related sample ever recorded from the wild in that lab.
And the thing that was a nail in the coffin for me was reading about the genome analysis between that closely related sample and COVID or SARS-CoV-2, because that basically demonstrated that there were almost no neutral silent mutations in the majority of the genome, and that only in the functional aspect of the genome, where that actually encodes for proteins, where there are changes, and they're quite drastic changes, and that within a month of COVID being in the world, there were a bunch of silent and meaningless mutations in the rest of the genome. So the odds of that many mutations happening without concurrent meaningless mutations making it look more different, it just seems unbelievable.
Astronomically unlikely that it would basically mutate all the things it needed to mutate without any random mutations, all in some intermediate host that we don't know about or can't identify. The pangolin theory apparently is dead.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, China also came out and said, yeah, it definitely didn't come from the wet market. So it's a zoonotic, but we don't know where. And it's like, oh, really? Okay, so the one explanation you had on zoonotic transfer is now dead in the water, and you have no further explanations.
I think that actually another huge nail in the coffin for it being zoonotic is that where's the string? So say it is zoonotic. Where's the string of identified early cases in the rest of China that could explain the geography? Because the bats that it came from don't live in Wuhan, and they don't sell those bats to wet markets. The wet market's out, so it's either there was some sort of bat facility in Wuhan, which nobody has made any indication there was, or there was some event that happened outside of Wuhan, and then people got sick along the way and brought it back to Wuhan. Well, where's the patient zero from the areas of China that actually have these bats? It just makes zero sense. There's no trail of COVID-19 or pre-COVID-19 pneumonia leading from the region that it theoretically could have actually been zoonotically introduced to Wuhan. There's nothing. It's just all of a sudden one day it shows up in Wuhan out of nowhere. Like it's just it
What you're forgetting are the all-star multi-million-dollar Chinese studies that demonstrate that it clearly came from Spain, Italy, or America before coming to Wuhan.
Oh yeah, I forgot that it was a shipment of infected cod where it lived frozen from fucking Europe. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
Or it was the U.S. Army team that came to compete in the international military games, and they didn't win all the events, so they're probably under the weather with something like COVID. Because the U.S. Army usually wins all the events.
Oh, that reminds me of one another layer of almost like hypocrisy and just stupidity was, one, China blaming black people for COVID-19. That was a classic. That was a classic.
And McDonald's
basically no one gave a shit. The rest of the world was like, "Oh yeah, that's not great, I guess, but fair enough, whatever." People, black people not even having to sleep under the bridge and not being able to buy food because they're banned from all buildings. Yeah, whatever. That China as usual. Fair enough. I'm type for my own.
I know. I find that so hilarious when people screaming about like the unbelievable white supremacist state of America and Canada, according to Trudeau as well, and not one peep about how black people literally could not buy food in China, and they had to rely on the charity of strangers, which I don't think was very high.
And then another classic was a lot of anti-Asian racism in the U.S. Perpetrated by other minorities, essentially. Like, it seems like, I don't think there's been studies, and I don't think there will be, but it seemed like the majority of the anti-Asian racism was coming from other minorities in the U.S. I'm sure there was white people too. But
we had a couple of instances here in Canada that were anti-racist. It was not only Asian, but there was
clearly not only white people. So I don't know. I just find it laughable that people still clinging to the notion white people are the only ones that can be racist, and there's a dozen videos showing Chinese people being attacked by other minorities. Like I don't know what else to call that other than racism. The classic
one is Jews getting screamed at and berated and whatnot by predominantly black people in the Black Lives Matter protests. Those were some classic videos.
Well, back on COVID in China, 4,000 Chinese deaths to COVID. So, they did a pretty good job with it,
Well, yeah, I don't know. The other funny ones were, for the numbers, were like Russia would have like 1.6 million 0.00000 tests done, like just a flat 1.6. They only did their testing in groups of 100,000 on the dot.
Yeah,
they never did odd numbers. They just did 100,000 at a time, and only.
What's the other one? I want to say like Abu Dhabi or
Bahrain was like that, and United Arab Emirates was like that.
It was UAE. Yeah.
The worst offender was definitely Russia. They just have like 2.7 million.
The US per capita.
Yeah, and it was just hilariously fake. And then Iran's death numbers were just people saying, "Oh, it's really bad in Iran" based on official numbers, and it's like that's like probably a 20th of the actual.
Yeah, they got absolutely obliterated, and they're like, "Yeah, it's not going too well here." It's like, well, I think it was like 60% of your fucking government, like their high level government people caught it. Yeah, you're not.
They ironically may have got herd immunity.
Yeah,
the only country the only country to actually reach herd immunity may have been Iran, because they got actually pounded. Yeah, it was something like
superpower.
It was like something like 65% of their.
Man, if you want to make a horrendous amount of money, I would say become a doctor, move to Iran, and specialize in COVID, like the fallouts of people getting COVID. you're going to be employed forever.
A great. I guess that is for some vaccine fucking idiocy. Iran is actually one of the countries that has banned Western-based vaccines.
Well, then congratulations.
So they're trying to source their vaccines from Cuba. I know what Cuba has something like 10 vaccine candidates, and Iran was like, "Yep, we'll go with it," and we're banning all Western ones. So fuck it.
Should have just gone with the like.
So I think leadership might be a little bit more reasonable to blame there.
Yeah, I think this is a time where it's like, okay, I think we can put a lot of the blame on that one.
Yeah, that seems like a less than ideal.
Though to be fair, they also had like an inability, even once they tried to enforce social distancing measures to stop their Muslim congregations. People were like licking statues and stuff in order to.
Yeah.
It became like that'll protect you from COVID. It's like that is definitely transmitting COVID.
You're all licking. Well, it's like maybe that's why it spread so goddamn fast.
Well, they had an election right around.
Oh, okay.
I think they had some sort of election right around like their worst outbreak, and they didn't enforce any restrictions around it or protocols. And then
it's like you're pretty much screwed then.
I don't know. Like so many of the postmortems are just that could have been like China's postmortem would have been very interesting if we actually ever got a postmortem, but it's just gonna be buried. Unfortunately,
I really speculate about the deaths. I guarantee, like, I bet you it's at 50 times higher than what they.
Yeah,
it has to be 50 times higher. That'd be like the lowest possible bar because 50 times higher is still only 200,000.
Well, some of the numbers in China are also just funny to talk about. Like some of the provinces outside of Wuhan would have like 594 cases with 300,000 tests and 594 recoveries, 0 deaths.
Yeah, and it's like, there's 80 million people in that province or 100 million people in that province, and you definitely only had a few hundred cases. Yeah, definitely.
Well, and of the hundreds of cases, nobody died.
Yeah.
It's magic. Like they after March, they figured out how to cure everyone that ever had COVID.
I don't know why we just didn't send all of our best scientists over there, because otherwise, if we had done that, we would have already beaten it.
Yeah, because they clearly figured it out immediately how to 100% surefire cure it, because nobody dies anymore in China, even if they get it. It's a miracle.
Oh, man, one of the things that it's a small thing, but something that I noticed with some people, especially on some parts of social media, they're like, we need to follow what China was doing to stop this. Like, China's doing so well. It's like, okay, one, you're believing their numbers, which is crazy. But two, have you not seen the videos of people getting welded in their homes and like screaming as the cops and the government officials place metal bars and bolt them and weld them in? Like, did you not notice what they did? to stop the spread? I don't think you understand what it took.
Well, and yeah, I think you can tell that there's some indication, like, just of how bad it got, because now I think they probably do have it more or less under control, it seems. But anytime there's like any sort of outbreak, they go like full emergency mode, which, I think it's basically kind of PTSD from Wuhan getting absolutely devastated.
Yeah, like it must have been just absolutely nightmarish there.
Well, I'm no expert, but there might be some ability to estimate excess deaths, although China, again, will doctor a lot of that. It's probably so. But, I mean, they were estimating, like, obviously way higher deaths just based on smoke from crematorium.
Oh, yeah, because almost like 99.99% of Chinese are cremated when they die. So like, can pretty much go with that as being a reliable indicator, because they're always going to be cremated when they die, even in times of non-COVID.
Yeah, so the crematorium smoke from Wuhan, I've seen some analysis of, and it was, the indication from that was bad. In terms
how
of
bad?
like how many actual deaths. I don't know. Like it was. I don't remember. This was like
I think
actually in the spring.
Yeah, if I remember, like roughly, it was in the hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands of deaths.
Because they have like 11 to 15 million people in Wuhan. I think it was 15 million, like technically, but they figured 11 million were in the lockdown because 4 million got out or something. Something along those lines.
I don't know if it's quite that high, but it was in the factor of 10x their official, which was like 3,000 or 4,000 at that time.
Well, I think it's like 3,500 or more of their like 4,000 deaths were in Wuhan
in the early months, and I think they estimated it was like at least 10x the official numbers.
I remember the UK.
They had a lot of non-COVID deaths in Wuhan. They had like definitely had death by starvation because of the lockdown stringency,
and other medical incidents because they just like the lockdown stringent, like people just weren't able to get medical attention for other things because the hospitals were overwhelmed or they were locked in their own home. Yeah. I think that's another thing that was also shown not shown, but like it seems like a lot of people just died in their own homes because they had COVID and they were locked in and they just weren't allowed to go to the hospital. So yeah, China's numbers are just, I don't know, not even, they're useless basically. Like
yeah, it was just a flu.
It's a bad joke, really.
Yeah, it's a meaningless waste of time to even consider their numbers. But and then the WHO is putting together a totally not biased group of totally upright, objective individuals to go into Wuhan or to go into China to
take a look,
to investigate, and they've already been shut down at every turn, even though they're already in the pocket of China. Like I don't know, it's just so pointless to try to do anything with China. Like they're just bad actors in every sense of the word.
Yeah, it's you're never gonna get a good faith engagement with like the government ever. It's just not gonna happen.
They tried. BBC crew tried to go to the site of where the original strain was found, and it's all blocked off, and the BBC couldn't get in there. And the WHO crew got held up at the at the airport, basically saying that the right documentation wasn't ready. It's like, what documentation? Like you're a totalitarian government. Like you can do whatever you want. You can let these guys through if you want. Like there's no documents. Like you're just having an excuse to delay them.
Yeah, so you can you burn everything down and get rid of everything.
Well, I'm sure it's more than that. I'm sure they want to basically intimidate these people through bureaucratic. Basically, I'm sure they want to exert their power over these people to show these people that unless you come up with a report that we want you to come up with, you're stuck in our borders and you might not ever leave. So I expect nothing of use or interest to ever come out of China regarding COVID.
Yeah, I find it pretty bizarre that anybody would be like, oh no, I trust the numbers. I think they're acting in good faith. I don't think they've been acting in good faith the entire time that you've been alive. So there really is no sense. Is there anything else?
You guys, I think that's wraps it up.
Yeah,
for me, I guess just to say that this whole situation, if you look, you can see how it illustrates the dysfunction in the system right now, right? Like a functioning system shouldn't be throwing out so many contradictory stances, so much flip-flopping, and so little acknowledgement of the contradictions, right? Like fair enough that the information was very fast-moving and there was mistakes made, but like it's clearly political when people are totally unwilling to own up to it, right? Like they just won't admit that they held that position 5 minutes ago.
Yeah,
like that's when it's like Orwellian in the sense, like, oh no, I've never said that masks don't work. And you see that when I was looking up the Fauci thing about masks, all the quote unquote fact checking sites from all the mainstream media garbage saying was saying misrepresented or false
Yeah, exactly.
because the video showing Fauci saying that masks don't work was it made in March. Then it's a false. It's false to say that Fauci said that masks don't work. It's like we're in April now. You can't say that. That's false. You can't say that he ever held this position because he did it a month ago, and that's not fair to pretend that someone, that said this a month ago, said it. It's he should just be allowed to unilaterally change his position and not get called out on it. So false.
And change history.
Yeah, fake news. You can't have that. So I just think it's one of those things that just illustrates how fucked up the information landscape is overall.
Yeah, I'd say for me, it also illustrated that there is quite a number of people within very high positions of power that are they're incompetent. They're truly and completely incompetent. And that's not to say all of them, but quite a few people that I'm across many nations that are they flubbed it so hard to the point where I just felt like, okay, I can see that being a competent person is a very difficult thing, and we've unfortunately voted in or allowed a lot of people who just are not capable of doing their damn jobs. Like, we've put them in those positions, and that is it was really just discouraging to see that. Like, man, this is the level of leadership that we have in many places. And obviously Trump is the big example there, but even with the lying with masks and stuff like that, even that was just enough for me to say damn, it's really, yeah, it really is disappointing to see that. But yeah, that's it for me. Anything else, you guys?
Think that about covers it.
Alrighty. Well, peace, guys.
Peace.
Peace.